this go? I don't know how to use Zoom. I should by now. Anyways, okay, so this meeting is being recorded. If you can't be on a recorded line for legal reasons, then please leave and I'll send you the replay. And just some quick announcements. Oh my gosh. It's my screen. Watch my screen freeze now. Okay. The first thing is I just wanted you to know that this is a inclusive environment. Okay, so to the extent that I can make this inclusive for everybody, I absolutely will, but I might need your feedback. If you feel it's not inclusive enough, let me know. I have made it so that you can enable closed captioning. The instructions are right here. So if there are any hearing difficulties, or if you just like to see the words printed on the screen, please follow these instructions here. Just click the CC at the bottom of your screen. Some other announcements are that March 9th is tomorrow. See the brilliant insights, right, that you came here for. Okay, so March 9th is tomorrow, and we're having a pod day tomorrow, or an engagement group, in which we all discuss each other's postings on social media at 1 p.m. and this helps to drive up engagement. So if you'd like to be included, please let me know. If you're already in the engagement pod on LinkedIn, let me know as well. And if you want me to review your postings or anything for tomorrow, this is like a big kind of community event that we all participate in. So please, I welcome you to join the LinkedIn pod. The other thing is that I've been feeling lately like there's not enough interaction in these webinars. So what I want to do is in 2 weeks, I'm having just a straight meetup, just a straight like chat around where we don't have any presenter, we don't have any agenda. The goal is just for us to maybe split off into subgroups and just talk about anything and everything related to transparency, flat fees, advice only, anything you want really. So it's just like a networking meeting, okay? And that's going to be on the 22nd at this same time, 1 p.m. It's just going to be on this line, and I'll be sending out the Zoom for it in our follow-up newsletter. The next thing is that the next webinar is on April 12th. And since so many people are requesting, now there you go, I just put it into the chat. Everybody is requesting information about how to be better at marketing, how to get more clients, how to do prospecting. And so I do have a lot of knowledge about this since that's what I do for a living. So I'm going to be speaking on the webinar in April. The April webinar is going to be a marketing webinar. And so please go ahead and sign up. The chat is in my goodness gracious, the sign up link is in the chat. So please go ahead and sign up there. The other thing is there are subgroups that I've created on LinkedIn so that y'all can chat over LinkedIn and share advice and tips with each other. I'm really doing everything I can to bring y'all together to foster camaraderie and open communication. I really feel like that's the best thing. So there's a flat fee subgroup and an advice only subgroup on LinkedIn. If you'd like to be part of either one, please message me and let me know. Also, I have a flat fee list that organizes advisors by state, and it's on the internet. So hopefully people can find you when they're looking for an advisor in a particular state. Let me know if you'd like to be on that list as well. And so I've spoken too much, and I'm about to turn it over to our speakers today, who are Steve Zeiger and Barry Flagg. But first, I just have a question. If y'all could weigh in here on this, what's been your experience in helping your clients buy life insurance or helping your clients with their life insurance? I'm going to stop talking now, and I want everybody to just chime in here. Go ahead.
I've had a great experience working both with Barry and John Ryan out of John Ryan Insurance Strategy Consultants. Barry's helped a couple of special needs families that I work with, and John has been great about just seamless process. Both of them I trust as true fiduciaries. They're both CFPs. They both know what they're doing. They've been in the business a long time. So I'm very comfortable referring my clients to either one of these gentlemen.
John Ryan is a subscriber to Veralytic, what I call a Veralytical advisor. And Steve Zeiger is also a Veralytical advisor. So you're going to get some of the same type thing that Skip is talking about today.
So Cody Garrett on the chat is saying, I collaborate with bcbrokerage.com. No upselling what clients need and keeps me fee only.
Not familiar with BG Consulting, but we'll talk about some of the things that fiduciary advisors, regardless of compensation model, can confirm whether or not the outside insurance desk, a new acronym, the insurance industry is known for acronyms, the OID that you're using has a fiduciary orientation or is operating under what are called NAIC, or National Association of Insurance Commissioner regulations, which are antithetical to fiduciary rules. So we will talk about that today.
Okay.
You asked experience. I may be an outlier here. I just started charging fees not too long ago and started with monthly fees. I keep them extremely low, but I still do life insurance, and being part of this community and learning more has been very helpful, because I think I'm starting to desire to transfer over to fee-only fiduciary like a lot of the people on this call are. So I'm still doing that myself, and I have an internal team that does it. But I'm still very proficient in that area. Again, probably the oddball here.
No problem.
Maybe not.
Maybe. I
You're
would say
still
most of the
welcome.
people that I've ran into, it seems that it's very arbitrary how they came to the dollar amount on how much whole life insurance they've had. And it seemed like it was very often based on how much money needed to be made rather than, and I worked under a firm that was acquired by Northwestern Mutual for a while. And it was always, hey, what's the question? The answer is whole life, but what's the question?
Right.
Yes,
That
I
sounds
started
like-
to grow up in that world, and I have experience with that world. And the first meeting I have with a client, we do a lot of fact finding and stuff, and we talk about how self-serving our industry is. So when it comes to insurance, if it fits, I make a decision based on cash flow and allocation and what a distribution strategy would be.
May I
Who
comment?
was the previous commenter about the firm getting acquired by Northwest Mutual?
Jesse.
Yes. So Jesse, you reminded me of early training. I started in the fiduciary investment business first. I then went to go work for a life insurance agency to broaden my experience, expand my resume. And there I was in my training. We've all heard about total needs selling, and I was told that what total needs selling is in the insurance business is I totally need a sale. That's total needs selling in the insurance business. Kind of like what you experienced.
Can I
I
interject?
actually had, she's since been fired, but I actually had a Northwestern Mutual agent one time lock me out from doing advisory meetings in their office. And we were owned by Northwestern Mutual because it was taking away from their insurance. So I wasn't allowed to come in their office.
You and I are getting along just fine.
Yeah, the way, and part of what I talk about is how terrible our industry is, because I feel like that is a big mammoth in our industry. And I think it's slowly, that agency system slowly starting to die. But, there's people associated with the firm that I'm in that still do that. I learned early on and saw that when I would bring clients to an experienced advisor, and they would do everything and anything to do the total needs insurance sale that the one gentleman mentioned. And I quickly got my own little DBA and tried to not associate as much with them. But it is an ugly thing. And just like somebody said, I feel like the equation starts with the answer of whole life or variable, depending on the firm. And the other things in the beginning of the equation are how much can you afford? Super ugly, not good for our industry, not good for any financial professional, and definitely not good for consumers.
Can I chat? How do I get on here?
You're on.
We can hear you.
Okay. Good, thank you. I'll probably take exception to most of the comments here, simply because I started my career in 1970 selling life insurance, and I'm still selling it today. And I think many of the comments that people have made about how it's sold are absolutely spot on. But I will also say that there are many professional life insurance agents who have effectively done a great job for their clients. I think where we need to be, and I'm developing in my own ADV, a process that will lead to my continuing to be able to help my clients they want on what is called a transparent basis. So I'm proud to have sold the life insurance I have. I still have those clients. They're 50 years in the making. Probably one of the first clients has a large 6 figures in cash value life insurance because he was astute enough to buy it, and he's worth many millions of dollars. And I think if we address it in the proper way, my humble opinion, it can be a very effective tool to utilize in support of our fiduciary standards. Again, we all know CFPs that aren't doing what they should be doing. I think our purpose is the right purpose. That's why I'm on this call.
Yeah.
I've gone to a flat fee. And I'm, again, simply put, I think I have an advantage, let's put it that way, over, and not that it's a big deal, but I think I have an advantage in terms of how to utilize life insurance properly.
Yeah, and I think, I think everybody needs life insurance. I guess what I've ran into over the years, and I don't want to seem too jaded because I have a client that sold a business that needs whole life, but I struggle with the fact that the minute I accept $1 a commission, I really can't call myself a fiduciary. And so I'm looking for firms that are like, hey, I want to send it to somebody, let them collect it, and make sure somebody can get paid for it. But I just want to make sure I'm not conflicting with how I view the world.
Let me ask you,
Go
would you be a fiduciary? I'll step back. I learned, does anybody here know Roy DiLiberto? Look him up. Well, as I understand it, Roy DiLiberto was the starter of the financial planning movement. And he, in my opinion, he set me on a right path. And he said he used to publish in the what is it, Financial Advisor. He's pretty much retired now, I suspect. And he said he finally got to the point of disclosure and transparency. And here's what he said. He said, disclosure is telling your client that you get paid a commission. Transparency is telling the client what the commission is. And he said, having been a general agent for Guardian Life, he said, I was absolutely frightened by the idea that I would do that. So he then said, first time he decided to do it, he disclosed to the client that he was making $15,000 on the sale or purchase, however you want to put it in perspective. And the client simply said, Roy, you've earned it. And here's a guy who was charging $20,000 fees for to his clients. So I think there's a lot of movement here, but I think I'm not going to not say that I'm not a fiduciary, because I've created a way in order to be transparent. And I recently brought it up to a young client, and he was excited to learn that if he already has a bunch of term with me, and he has for years, but he's now in the position where he can save a lot of money. And I won't get into that. But when I said, well, that's fine. If you choose to buy any more life insurance or convert the term, I'll disclose to you what the commissions are, because I also know how to redesign a contract that'll compete to reduce the commissions. And that's an advantage I think I have versus the typical, if you will, life insurance agent. But I'll get off what might sound like a high horse here.
Anthony, I agree with everything you're saying. I really do. And I'm very similar. And I saw Cody in the chat put fiduciary in letter versus fiduciary in spirit. And I'd love to know the fiduciary in letter definition, because I feel like, all of the things that I do are in clients' best interest. Whatever's right at that time. And yes, whole life, I believe in it and own it. but it's not the duct tape of the financial industry like many people make it.
Agreed.
So done appropriately, I think that's a much better plan, and it's a both and, not an either or.
I guess for me, it's like when the world went from commission to advisory, and it just feels to me that we're going to 100% fee for advice, and product becomes insignificant. And that's kind of the way I try to be, like I'm trying to do it.
I would love to see, if I may interrupt and interject, I'd love to see the day when we have flat fee life insurance. And there was a company out there, and they got one of the big TIAA CREF, I think.
TIAA CREF, Emeritus, Nationwide,
right?
just introduced a new one.
Right. All of them, ironically, are variable oriented. And I think TIAA got out of it.
They did.
Listen, I started my career with Mother Met. That's another story. And I then went to Mass Mutual. I'd love to see them have a zero-based commission. Love to see it.
Hey, can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
So the issues in my experience, starting in the ERISA money management business as an analyst.
Yep.
Certainly commission creates a conflict of interest, as Jesse said.
Sure.
Some conflicts of interest can be eliminated. Some conflicts of interest simply can't. And so if they can't, then they need to be disclosed and mitigated to the greatest extent possible. That's fiduciary principles, right? And it is compensation neutral. It's compensation blind. Form of compensation is a conflict. It's got to be eliminated or mitigated. And so I don't want to devote the whole hour to talking about compensation.
Okay. Y'all, I'm so sorry, but in that spirit, I do think we need to get moving on to the questions, because a lot of people had a lot of questions here. So just as a reminder, we are coming back on the 22nd. For those of you that came in late, I feel like the group is not getting enough interactive discussion because we've had a few presenters. So I'm just going to be having a chat around on the 22nd at 1 p.m. Eastern, same Zoom line. I'm going to email it out to everybody after this call, so we can have more engaging discussions this way. But I do want to get to the question and answer, because that was what the meetup was originally going to be about, right?
Yeah, I think there's actually a perfect segue from what Anthony just said into a slightly different discussion. Do you mind if I?
Please do so.
Sure. So I want everyone to imagine something. Let's use the example that Anthony used. And Anthony, I'm truly not picking on you. It's just, you always have to find a segue.
First time.
So let's pretend that we have an average American. They're 50 years old. They're about to buy some insurance policy, and that compensation is $15,000. Okay. Everyone just throw out a number. Let's just make up a number for a minute of what they think the face amount of that policy was. Just make up a number and I'll grab it. Somebody who's not on mute.
$2 million.
$2 million. Okay. So we're lucky enough to have on this call the equivalent of the person who invented Morningstar. We have Barry Flagg on the phone. So Barry, I'm going to ask you a question. On a $15,000 premium, where someone's saying the compensation might be $15,000. What are the costs of that $3 million? How much is the insurance company deducting off the top of your head for cost of insurance charges, policy expenses, premium loads, maybe a cash value based wrap fee? What would you guess that number is?
So I don't know the individual breakdown of the expenses, but sales loads, fixed administration expenses, which can be used to pay commissions, cash value-based wrap fees, which can be used to pay trails, kind of like assets under management fees. Those typically constitute about 15% of total expenses in a policy. And then cost of insurance charges comprise the other 85% of costs charged inside a life insurance policy.
Okay. So one of the things that I think that can be really helpful is for everyone to think about the fact, and I want to give an analogy to what Barry's saying. So I'm going to guess that on that $3 million contract, the total costs were, I don't know, $2.5 million. Is that fair to say, Barry?
Over the life of the contract to maturity?
Right.
On a how big of a policy?
What was it, 3 million?
3 million, probably not 2.5, but it's going to be in the millions.
Okay, so let's pretend it's 2 million. So one of the things that I think will be helpful to concentrate on today is the commission might be $10,000 or $15,000. But if the costs are $2 million, and Barry, how much do those costs vary by? I think there was a Trust in the State article that you've quoted a couple of times. How much do those costs vary by?
We publish that data. It's 80% at the younger ages, little less at the older ages.
Okay, so let's just call it 80% for a moment. So if we have $2 million in charges, and those charges vary by 40% above and 40% below, that's a total swing of $800,000. So someone's either overpaying by $800,000 or they got a great deal and they're paying $800,000 less in costs than the person who is paying the most costs. But we're comparing that to a $15,000 compensation amount. And I think one of the things we can talk about today is we can, whether it's a no load or a fully loaded contract, the best way to try to save someone hundreds of thousands of dollars is to learn how to analyze those costs, not just what the compensation is. Is that a good aha moment for everybody of one of the things we want to dig into today? Right, so I'm going to give an analogy. You go to buy a car and the car is $50,000 and someone says to you, I'm the world's best negotiator for windshield wipers. And you're like, well, who cares? The windshield wipers cost $200 on the car. I want to learn how to negotiate the $50,000 cost, right? And that's one of the things that we'll be speaking about today. How do you find out what the true costs are so you can figure out where somebody might be overpaying or where there's an insurance company that's just not good for your client at whatever specific age they happen to be. Is that a helpful perspective? Okay. So we really didn't script this out. I just thought it was a perfect time to talk about that.
Yeah, right, exactly. So Steve, what are the tax consequences for over leveraging a policy?
So there, you might see examples of, like I know on TikTok and lately there have been lots of these examples of people say, put money into a life insurance policy and let it grow for 10, 20 or 30 years, and then take out lots of loans against the death benefit on an income tax-free basis, right? And that's the pitch of many people. Anthony's waving his head. And one of the problems with that is there are some insurance companies where that loan charge is growing compound at 4, 5, 6, 7%. And if that policy lapses, all of the gain is taxable income. And I'm going to just throw in one more blatant mistake that's going on right now. There was someone, I think Sarah sent me a video a couple of days ago. So what the person was doing was they were saying, put money into this indexed policy, and there's nothing wrong with indexed in the right situation, but put money into this indexed policy, then take out tax-free loans, and they only ran the illustration to age 90. And yet 50% of people might live past age 90. And that means that a good deal of the money that they took out tax-free, they're now going to need to shovel back into the policy because it really wasn't a fair sales pitch. So again, there can be a huge taxable income on those loans if the policies ever lapse, surrendered, or canceled. And one of the things that you should do is you should run an illustration at a lower interest rate and see what happens at a lower interest rate. And I'm going to mention Dick Weber published an article where he took 20 top, I think it was IUL contracts, and he lowered the return from 6% to 4%. And there were drops in income of over 80%. Right. And that's something that you would not expect. So A, you want to run those illustrations at a lower interest rate, see how the policy performs. Barry will talk later about how to look at the costs in those policies and see if those are excessive. And then if you actually have a client where they took out all these loans that may become taxable, there are actually some policies that are designed to be what are called loan rescue policies. And the loan rescue policy, instead of the loan interest rate being 3, 4, 5% compound, might be a 5%, a 5 basis point loan charge. And that might be able to keep the client away from the tax man. Is that a little more than you wanted to hear, but hopefully helpful? Yeah. Anthony, there was something that you wanted to comment on?
No, I don't have all the answers. I appreciate what everyone's doing, and I'm here to learn.
All right. So
No,
Barry,
I'll leave it at that.
okay, Barry, what are the hidden costs in a policy?
So as I said before, there are 4 types of costs in every life insurance policy, whether disclosed or not disclosed. There are cost of insurance charges, that is the 800-pound gorilla. You know, if you were in charge of running a business and you were spending 85% of your expenses on one thing, you would focus at least 85% of your attention on that one thing to make sure that you are as efficient as possible in that area. So cost of insurance charges are 85% of the total cost equation. Premium loads, which the insurance company collects to pay commissions. Fixed administration expenses. Premium loads are a percentage of the premium paid. Fixed administration expenses are fixed at the time of policy issuance based on the face amount of the policy. Those expenses are also oftentimes used to pay a commission or an override for service kind of thing. And then cash value based fees are collected mostly on variable life insurance policies, but not only variable life insurance policies. And those either go toward insurer profitability, or they can be used to pay an assets under management fee to the advisor or advisors, as the case may be.
Sarah, I'm going to share my screen for 1 second just to show a picture of what Barry was talking about. Hopefully everyone can see this. So this is, I'm going to switch my screen. So this is a life insurance illustration that everyone's probably seen, right? Here's the premium. Here's the cash value at a 2% guarantee. Here's the cash value at a 4.95% guarantee. But one of the things that we want to talk about today or learn about today is, in a life insurance illustration, it's impossible to determine what the costs are, and it's impossible to determine what the performance is. And I'm going to just give you a quick example. This insurance company credits 4.95%. How do we know whether they're earning 5.95%, taking 1% to do whatever they need to do, and crediting you 4.95%, or whether they think they can earn 20% on their money, and after expenses, you net 4.95%? It's impossible to tell. And I'm going to walk you through an example really quickly. Is that okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the 25th year of this illustration. And in the 25th year, can I make it bigger? In the 25th year, the cash value is $1.828 million. Everybody see that? Okay. And the previous year is $1.776 million. And this is going to come back to Barry's answer in 2 minutes. So we have $1.828 million in the 25th year. We have $1.776 in the 24th year. So let's subtract one from the other. And if we subtract 1.8 million from 1.776 million, the policy had a gain of $51,994, right? And we want to figure out what our expected gain was. Multiply 1.828 million times 4.95%. Our expected gain is $90,000. Simple math. Well, if we take our expected gain of 90,000, subtract our actual gain of 51,000, we had expected costs of $38,000. Everybody with me? Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at what Barry just spoke about. We're going to get the actual numbers that the insurance company uses. So someone just write down this really quick. 1.828 million is the cash value. We expected gains of 90,000. We expected costs of 38,000. So now we're going to look at these numbers. We're going to look at what's the premium charge that Barry just mentioned. What's the admin charge? What's the insurance charge? What's the amount credited? Okay. Now let's magically, and you know, we talked about what's hidden. So let's talk about in this illustration, what's hidden. You remember in the 25th year, somebody wrote it down. How much was the cash value? Somebody yell it out. Nobody yell it out.
1.828 million.
1.828 million. And how much was 1.828 million times a 4.95% rate of return? How much did we expect to gain?
90,000.
90,000. Let's look at how much the gain actually, how much was credited behind the scenes. $348,000.
Change your word there, Steve. It's not was credited. That's what the insurance company has to credit in the future. Even though they said that they're going to only credit 5, they have to actually credit that number, which is much higher and is what I would consider to be fraud in any other segment of the financial services business.
Right. Agreed. So now let's go. We did the math for you. If you have $1.828 million and you get a gain of $348,000, you're being credited with 19.07% on your policy.
You have to earn, you have to be credited. You're not being credited. You have to be credited with that 25 years from now. If you don't get it, the policy doesn't work.
Right. Even though it says 4.95%. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, we don't really know this Zeiger guy and this Flagg guy. Maybe they just chose one aberration year. Let's look at the 30th year. The cash value is $2.030 million. And as Barry said, you need to be credited $580,000. Who's good at math? What's a $580,000 credit on a $2 million cash value?
25+%.
25+%. So now, and we're not here to talk about whether they can credit 25 or whether they can't credit 25. We're here to simply say the client and their advisor, and probably the insurance broker, thinks that 4.95% is the magic number that they need to be credited to make this work. When in actuality, as you just saw, it's 19 or 25%, right? So part of the work that Barry does, that Veralytic does, is help bring this to light.
Yeah, by the way, you don't have to become a Veralytic customer the way Steve is, or the way the other gentleman Skip mentioned is. But I know many of you mentioned in the chat box that you work with insurance marketing organizations, certain insurance marketing organizations, certain brokerages. If you are not getting this information, given what insurance companies are allowed to do, and Steve's right, that even the brokerage companies don't necessarily know this. If you're not getting year by year detailed disclosure of costs and performance requirements, you can't possibly be satisfying your fiduciary duties. You can't. Fiduciary duties involve justifying costs, setting reasonable performance expectations, and assessing risk relative to client risk tolerance. Those are basic tenets of fiduciary principles. If you don't get that page, you can't be doing that, or whoever you're relying on can't be doing it for you.
Can I ask a question about that? All this
Sure.
real quick. So on all that illustration stuff in the beginning, Barry, I think you said 80 to 85% of the cost is the actual insurance. And I guess that means once they pay out a death benefit, because as a consumer, I'm thinking, hey, if I was sitting across the table and somebody said, hey, Jesse, you can buy this term policy for 20 years and just rent insurance, or you can buy this whole life policy that's going to have this cash value. in my pea brain, I'm thinking the delta between the payment I'm gonna have to pay every month is going, well, that's the cost of the insurance. Seems like it's almost the term payment, and everything else seems like it's other costs, but I'm thinking of it wrong. Because from a consumer perspective, the cost of the insurance, wouldn't it just be the term cost? Like what they have to pay out of the back end.
Absolutely. It's the term cost on the term policy, and it's the cost of insurance charge and expenses inside the permanent policy. It's not the premium on the permanent policy, because with the premium, you get some cash value. Might be good cash value, might not be good cash value, might be restricted access to the cash value account, might be unrestricted if it's a fee only product. So it's not the difference in premium, if that's what you're asking, Jesse. It's the difference in the term premium, which you know what it is because it's there, right? I mean, the term premium is the cost of a term policy, but on a permanent policy, any form of permanent, whole life, universal life, indexed universal life, variable universal life, if you're not getting those pages that Steve showed on the screen, you can't possibly do that cost analysis. And by the way, it is a little extra difficult on whole life. Most whole life companies, for the right size transaction, will have an actuary calculate the actual costs. You can't get those pages for a whole life policy, but if the insurance company won't have an actuary calculate them for you, you can get them from Veralytic at the risk of self-promotion there.
Thank you.
Hey, question for you. Isn't it safe that we should always assume that anything that has an underlying chassis of universal or variable life can never really be predicted? As it states in all their illustrations, and as I've found over 20 years, that any of those types of products, we don't know the cost from year to year.
We absolutely do. The cost. Now, I completely agree with your first statement. Completely agree with your first statement.
Let me correct. We can't predict the costs in 5 years or 10 years.
Yes,
you
you
know
can.
The cost.
No, you absolutely can. You absolutely can.
The underlying costs can change, and it even states in all the illustrations. So I feel like those are always unpredictable. You can calculate it used on today's variables, but 5 years from now, the variables are different.
If you're looking at the hypothetical premium or the hypothetical cash value or the hypothetical death benefit, I completely agree with you, Timothy. Completely agree with you that it is completely unpredictable. The Society of Actuaries says it's unpredictable. The U.S. Treasury says it's unpredictable. FINRA has a rule that strictly prohibits it because it's misleading, right? So I completely agree with you. You cannot use hypothetical premiums, hypothetical cash values, or hypothetical death benefits as any measure of anything. However, the costs are on file with 50 some state departments of insurance, if you include the territories. For an insurance company to change the costs, they have to file with all 50 some state departments of insurance. They have to justify their cost increase or decrease. And frankly, I have yet to see in my 20 years of actually looking at costs, I have yet to see an insurance company say at the point of sale that they're going to charge one number and not charge that number. If they say they're going to charge a number, lo and behold, they charge that number. Now, the other side of it, though, the investment side, is completely not completely unpredictable, but it's unpredictable within certain ranges. Like there's a bond fund is more predictable than an emerging growth fund, but they're both unpredictable. And it's that side that makes the hypothetical premium, the hypothetical cash value, and the hypothetical death benefit completely unpredictable.
Right.
So Barry, what do you say when a broker says this is properly structured? It must be.
Define structured for me. And I have yet to find a broker who can answer that question. They all say it's got to be properly structured. Anthony, you may be the exception to the rule because I think you said that, and I don't mean to throw you under the bus if I just did, but I 9 times out of 10, when a broker says, well, I structure it differently, I structure it properly and nobody else does it. So I say, well, how do you mean? And they say, well, I just do. And so Veralytic measures. There are policies specifically designed and structured to be death benefit only or death benefit type, death benefit emphasis type policies. And there are policies that are specifically designed for wealth accumulation. And if you think about it mathematically, a wealth accumulation plan is one that you're going to put a lot of money in. Well, if you're going to put a lot of money in it, you want a policy that has low premium loads and low cash value based wrap fees, right? Just like if I was going to put money into a mutual fund, I don't want a big sales load going into my on my deposits, and I don't want high fund management fees eroding my return, right? So that's what properly structured means for a Veralytical advisor, for a wealth accumulation style policy. For a death benefit only policy, you're looking for the lowest possible premium per dollar of death benefit. So even if sales loads are high relative to a wealth accumulation type policy, that is not as important as the cost of insurance charges. If the cost of insurance charges are high in a death benefit only or a death benefit emphasis type plan, it's not going to be the right product. So properly structured means are the composition of the costs designed for the goal, objective, circumstances, and constraints.
Harry, if I may.
Sure.
That's exactly what I was referring to, just in a simplistic way. I can design a contract to fit based upon objectives and the power of companies who are trying to do the right thing. And computers, of course, will allow that to occur. You're probably pretty familiar with private placements, I'm sure. You know, and those are the types of contracts for everyone on the call who may not be familiar with them. They're very high cash oriented contracts that are being utilized by wealthy people. And in many cases, the primary companies won't even begin talking to you unless you have a certain net worth, usually in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And in fact, you don't need the insurance. So, but you're right on, Barry. I thank you for bringing that up. And that's my intent. That's my approach. So I'll leave it at that.
What are Stephen and Barry's thoughts with respect to using Monte Carlo simulations to sell IUL policies?
Steve, you want me to take it or you want to take it?
You can, I'll comment after, no problem.
So I would change a couple of words there, Sarah. I think Monte Carlo simulations are useful to fee-only advisors, flat fee advisors, for the oversight, if you will, of any type of permanent life insurance product that's not otherwise guaranteed. If premiums and death benefits are guaranteed, I don't need a Monte Carlo simulation to figure out what my risks are, because the insurance company is guaranteed that they're on the hook for any risks of underperformance. But IUL, given what is allowable under NAIC rules, is probably the product type that a Monte Carlo simulation will be most helpful with. A Monte Carlo simulation will assess or evaluate the likelihood of the policy meeting expectations based on the illustrated, what my dad used to call the givens, the rate of return, the costs, what have you. And so, you know, if you've got questions about, and there are, just like, you know, not everybody uses Monte Carlo simulations to figure out somebody's retirement, the likelihood they're going to get a retirement benefit they want to get. They're useful. I wouldn't say you have to use them all the time, but they're very, very useful in evaluating the reasonableness of future expectations for IUL, whole life, universal life, and variable life.
Just really quickly, when you run a Monte Carlo simulation, you need to have those costs that we just outlined in the previous slide, or you can't run the Monte Carlo sim. And secondly, you'll find that high cost products perform poorly compared to lower cost products when you run them through a Monte Carlo simulation. So again, it's if you look at the, you know, I think one of the reasons for our success in the space is that we talk compliance, not sale. We talked from the compliance manual, not from the sales manual. You know, Barry's been mentioning the Society of Actuaries, what FINRA says, what the OCC says. He said that before. If you read through all of the New York State regulation or the CFP fiduciary standard or FINRA rule 2210 or the Uniform Prudent Investor Act, none of them mention Monte Carlo sims, but they all mention justify costs, investigate costs, because if you'll have a higher odds of success if you start there. Does that make sense to everybody?
What are the top 3 questions to ask to uncover the insurance policy sold was or was not the correct one for a particular individual?
You can answer.
Well, I hope everybody on the call can. What's the number one thing you want for any life insurance, either in force or new proposal? What's the number one thing you want to get first?
The financial plan in place.
I guess a strategy of why it even makes sense, and then type.
The illustration.
Copy of the policy.
So I would say Timothy is probably right in a broader thought process that, you know, let's make sure that there's actually a need for life insurance first. You know, but if you're, I interpreted Sarah's question that what are the 3 things that top 3 questions you ask about a life insurance policy? The first one is that those cost disclosures, the year by year, the first thing you ask for. And I heard Skip say illustration, and I know Skip well enough to know that he meant the complete illustration to include all cost disclosures. That's number 1. Steve, what do you think about number 2 and number 3?
I think it's always, what are the client's goals? And I think the client's goals and risk tolerances really point you in the direction of how to do the planning and how to help them find the right solution. And if you ever hear from anyone that life insurance is the Swiss Army knife of financial services products, run for the door.
Yes.
Actually, that's a good point, Steve, that you tied with, I don't remember if it was Timothy or Jesse said product type. But, you know, there are those who are licensed to sell certain type products and they are not licensed to sell other type products. And lo and behold, you know, it's amazing how, you know, a certain product, if somebody is licensed to only sell a certain product type, that product becomes the Swiss Army knife, as Steve says, for every situation that they have ever seen. And all forms of permanent insurance are more similar than they are different. The distinguishing difference for all forms of permanent life insurance is what the cash values are invested in. So don't get lost in the marketing hyperbole for, you know, this product offers this and that. And
Banking.
what's that?
Infinite banking.
Infinite banking, right? Permanent insurance products, cash value insurance products are distinguished mostly by what they're permitted to invest in. A universal life product invests in high grade bonds and government-backed mortgages. So does a whole life policy. And yet a illustration from the same company, an illustration of a universal life policy will project values at 4%. The illustration for the whole life product from the exact same company will project values at 8%. And for decades, yet both products are required by regulation to invest in the same asset classes. Makes no sense. So when you think about life insurance, resist what the insurance industry is explaining why a product works, and think about modern portfolio theory. What is the rate of return that's reasonable to expect from the asset classes into which I'm either required to or allowed to invest in? Universal life and whole life, high grade bonds and government-backed mortgages. Indexed universal life, required by regulation to invest in high grade bonds and government-backed mortgages, but you can allocate the interest from those bonds and mortgages to an index, an equity index. Variable, kind of like the 401k, You have a fixed family, you can invest in a variety of different inversely correlated asset classes. So I would say detailed expense pages first, risk tolerance second, because that's going to determine your product type, like Timothy or Jesse was saying. And then what was the third thing you said, Steve?
Clients' goals, risk tolerance.
I may have misheard you. Did you say IUL projects their illustrations at 4 and whole life projects them at 8%?
A traditional universal life, not indexed universal life, but traditional universal life. It's, different companies do different things. So
I agree with that. It's the whole life that statement shocked me, and maybe I misheard. I don't ever recall seeing it being projected at 8%, but there are also a difference between mutual and non-mutual companies as well.
So I don't know if the 8% number is valid this moment, but there is, for any insurance company, there is a significant difference. If they sell both universal life and whole life, there is generally a significant difference between the rate used to project future expectations, a significant difference between universal life and whole life, even though both of those products are required by regulation to invest in the same asset classes.
Right.
And I apologize if I came off a little jaded at the beginning. Northwestern Mutual, but when they acquired Russell Investments, when I worked there, when the current CEO stood on stage in front of 1,000 employees and said, "You know the difference between us and you? You manage 150 billion in assets. 150 billion we have, it's ours." It's like, wow, you guys make a lot of money off life insurance.
Yeah, and I will add, Jesse, to your comment about Northwestern Mutual. There are the industry, and by the way, something I do want to talk about is what's changing in the industry right now, and I'll come back to that. But Veralytic provides to Forbes and USA Today and the Robb Report data that they then use to rank the best insurance companies for this, that, and the other thing. And Northwestern Mutual is consistently ranked on its merits, right? Setting aside sales practices, which I disagree with, setting aside some philosophy, their products based on financial strength, cost competitiveness, access to cash value, reliability of their illustrations, actual historical performance of invested assets underlying cash values. Empirically, they are ranked as one of the best insurance companies, particularly for whole life. So I don't want anybody to misunderstand my comments that are directed to industry sales practices, which I object to. But if a company has products that they're rated, highly rated, their costs are competitive, their performance is reasonable to expect, they provide good access to account values, and they have good historical performance, that's what a fiduciary should look for.
I think that's a good comment, because I think, sorry for the lack of finding a better term, but I think we could take anything, human nature, and bastardize it. I think there's a lot of great companies that, like you're saying, sales practices, like Sarah, you mentioned, I think it was Be Your Own Banker, Infinite Banking. I'd never market myself like that, but sure, I have real estate investors that own a lot of whole life, and they go back and forth between it to sort of be their own banker. I don't call it that, but it works. But I don't think like their book subscribes or their sales team subscribes, we should buy our cars and everything in life. It's the only asset you should ever own. So I feel like, from my experience in practice, whole life's been the safe bet when there's a need for a permanent life insurance. I feel like it's more predictable now. Guaranteed interest rates at 3%. So I feel like it's more predictable. Where I've used universal life once or twice in an estate planning process where we just wanted term insurance for life. So no hopes of cash value, like Anthony was talking about, with all the moving pieces, being able to solve a client problem with it. Never touched variable, too unpredictable, keep your investments separate.
Right.
But for me, it's a both and. It's never been an either or, like our industry is obsessed with fighting over. Is life insurance better than an investment portfolio, and buy term, invest the difference? I think that's all nonsense, and they're all wrong. When it fits, it's a both and, not an either or.
I'm so sorry to have to jump in here. Okay, so there's actually, it's 5 minutes until 2 p.m. Eastern time. Now, I'm happy to stay on the webinar after the hour, but I just want to make sure I ask this question because I know a lot of people do tend to jump at the hour. Everybody who asked me a question before the webinar, did your question get answered? Because I've tried to do that, but in case we didn't, could you please speak up now? And then Barry and Steven will answer the questions before the hour is over. So Julia, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I was going to chime in, Sarah. So my question was kind of about the financial engineering that's happening within the investments and the structured products, that space on how do you discern outside of whole life insurance, universal. And I'll be honest, I'm more in this fee only, very biased towards term. So I'm just curious on how to coach clients as the space, in my opinion, is more and more complicated today to navigate. If you guys have any recommendations on how to, again, yeah, kind of how to see through the weeds of all these different products that we're not missing out on opportunities versus staying conservative enough and not trying to do unneeded risk.
So I often hear the life insurance industry described as complicated. And I personally don't think it's more complicated than hedge funds that have exotic indexing strategies and that are that are, you know, more transparent than life insurance, but not as transparent as a mutual fund. And people don't describe hedge funds as complicated. They're sophisticated, but not complicated. The challenge, I think the challenge, the word that is used, that complicated is used for instead of is obfuscated. The information you need, and this goes back to the conversation we were having, I can't remember with whom we were having it earlier, but it goes back to the conversation about term insurance versus the costs charged inside that policy. I suspect, Julia, that if you get those detailed expense pages, and if you ask for them and somebody doesn't give them to you, or they're hesitant to give you, that will tell you something. But if you do get them, you can lay out, here's my term premiums, here's my investing the difference, and here are the costs charged inside the life insurance policy. And then you can actually see if there's this financial engineering going on, like Steve talked about earlier, or if the returns are consistent on both sides, and if there's a benefit or if there's not a benefit, if the costs are higher or lower over what the expected coverage duration is. Generally speaking, if the need for insurance is less than life expectancy, term insurance will always be cheaper, always, because term insurance can only be issued up to life expectancy. So the insurance company is, if you think about it from the insurance company's perspective, they're insuring a pool. They're only collecting premiums to pay out claims on half the pool. So it's going to always be less than permanent insurance, where permanent insurance, they're building in the cost of renewability all the way for life, where they know they're going to have to pay every claim. So they're going to have to collect to pay every claim. If you get those if you get that detailed expense pages, that year by year cost disclosure, I think you will be able to see where there's financial engineering and not, and you'll be able to better do your analysis of term versus permanent.
Barry, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Sure.
I'm going to share a screen, and Barry's going to walk through something.
I don't know if we have time, Steve, because I think Sarah's got more people with more questions.
Let's do this 60 seconds. Barry, just explain one of these Veralytic charts so someone could understand how the financial engineering can be sort of discovered. These are one of your Veralytic reports.
So in every Veralytic report, we calculate the rate of return required to meet expectations, which, when it's different than the rate of return prominently displayed on the first page of the illustration, that's when you know financial engineering is going on.
Right. So this one on the front page of the illustration showed 4.95%. But if you took the illustration and the detailed expense pages that we walked you through, Julia, right?
Yes.
See, the numbers were calculated at 9.51, and that's what the Veralytic research helps you uncover in an instant, right?
That's what I would say fits into your
Gotta go,
category of
everybody.
financial engineering.
Take care.
Thank you
Thanks.
for your comments, Anthony.
Yeah.
I got a quick comment. Are we too deep in the weeds to find out the cost of term versus a permanent product and what's appropriate? And I kind of feel like if doing planning, you would know if a permanent would be appropriate or not, and then just move to that section. I would just assume that majority of costs would be higher in a permanent versus a term. Is that kind of what you were thinking, Julia? I mean, I'm
I
always
was going
coming
to-
from this. Go ahead.
For me, I was going even beyond just the whole versus term. I think there's other products out there, and I guess that's where, honestly, we're out of time, but the scope was a little bit bigger in my question on some of these insurance products that are getting created and how that fits within a financial plan as well. And so my question might be a little outside of the scope of what we're discussing, but that was helpful, Stephen, the report there that you showed on, yeah, when you see the costs. The other issue being trying to get to those cost comparisons and getting the full complete cost pages is another tricky journey because it's not always forthcoming.
Right.
And I agree with you on hedge funds, but hedge funds, there's, gates to entry on. You need to be an accredited investor. Sometimes people are just sold a whole life insurance policy saying, hey, this is perfect for you for where you are. And people just sign on the dotted line. And then a lot of times I'm looking at after the fact and trying to coach on where they are. So.
Yeah, Julia, that's like kind of been my thing is like these people get into these and you can't unwind it without, a painful process. And in fact, most people are embarrassed and shamed a lot of times that think that they fell for it. So it might be a while before they even feel comfortable to tell you because the husband goes, don't tell them about that because they're ashamed of it. And I'm like, that's what's disappointing to me.
I think for me, where I oversimplify is from an insurance standpoint, whole to me, and again, I may be grossly oversimplifying, whole policies to me are estate planning and maybe the business side. And then term policies are for everybody else. Because when you don't have as complicated of needs, you're not the Swiss Army knife. It becomes, I think, Cody, you put the analogy of like going to a Ford dealership, you're going to get the Ford, over solving on some of the issues that you're looking to help clients figure out.
With the understanding that there's an exception to every rule of thumb. Rule of thumb, they call it permanent insurance for a reason because it's for a permanent need, right? And so if it's estate planning, leaving a legacy, balancing an estate, funding a buyout of a business that's going to go from generation to generation, those are all legitimate reasons for permanent insurance. And then as we talked about earlier, there's still an 80% variance between best available rates in terms and worst available rates in terms. So that's where you do your analysis. If it's not a permanent need, even though I know there's a lot of promoters that promote permanent insurance for a lot of other things, infinite banking and I'm not saying there's not exceptions to the rule, but if it's not a permanent need, term insurance is always less expensive because the insurance company only has to pay half the claims or less.
And just so you know, if you ever have a question regarding an insurance policy, one of the beauty, not only is the information in, Veralytic multiple patents, but they don't need to know who the client is to provide you the research. So you can get, my email address or Barry's email address. You can redact all the client information, send it to us. And just as you might send a Morningstar report to a client, we'll help you decipher a Veralytic report for your client, whether it's on an existing policy, or something that's being proposed. Just calling us up doesn't mean you have to do business with us. It just means you want your client to have a better outcome, as do we.
We didn't actually cover that, Stephen and Barry, but what is it exactly that you do? Both of you, just real quick, because we are going to have some people going. So we didn't do a formal introduction, like what, but.
The easiest way to understand what we do is we help advisors with information about life insurance the way Morningstar helps advisors. And when I say helps, we publish research. We're not a consultancy. You stick your credit card into the computer, you get access to our research, just like you stick your credit card into Morningstar's computer and you get access to research. Stephen is one of those users.
Okay.
Stephen?
Yeah, it's, we're just trying to, the life insurance industry has, people are uncomfortable with lots of things in it, and we're just trying to change the world and make it, the life insurance industry, a better industry with transparency, full disclosure,
Right.
benchmarking, the same things that RAs do.
Okay. So how is it changing? Because Barry, you said you wanted to talk about that.
So the New York Department of Financial Services issued a rule 3 years ago, a best interest rule for life insurance. It lines up pretty well with fiduciary principles, not perfectly. It's their first attempt, but they issued it 3 years ago. As you might imagine, several significant parties to the insurance industry filed lawsuit against it. In October of this past year, the highest court in New York, it was appealed twice. The highest court in New York found that the rule was constitutional and went into effect. And so there is now formal legal guidance for what clients' best interest. I mean, if you go to a cocktail party and you ask insurance professionals, do you serve clients' best interest? They all say yes. So, but what does that really mean? I mean, does it mean that they do their best? They mean they do their best with what the company allows or whatever, right? So I saw somebody say something about, a Ford dealership. Well, I'm selling you the best Ford. That's doing my best. No. That's not the client's best interest. So there is now formal legal guidance for what client's best interest means for life insurance. California is doing a similar bill is working its way through the California legislature as we speak.
In your opinion, is that just send a letter saying that I have my best interest and a few disclosures? That's probably standard, not customized. And I feel like if somebody has an insurance license and nothing else, I feel like it's the wild, wild west, and why they're on TikTok and why they talk about investments when it's an indexed account and they have no investment. I feel like that is the major problem. So I'm really interested in what you're saying, because it's the regulation of people or professionals in our industry that can call themselves a financial advisor. Anything that anyone on this call has to work and pass tests to have the right to call themselves, I feel like they can all call themselves that with a sliver of knowledge because they read one book. So,
Perhaps no knowledge at all. Well, I guess they are
sales
they have some knowledge, but I mean, I don't know how it's, unless you define your market as somebody who has only conservative risk profile, which you don't know until you meet them. So that's next to impossible. Then you have to be securities licensed, I think, to serve clients' best interest. To serve the spectrum of clients' best interest, you have to be variable licensed, because when you get to a prospect who has a moderate aggressive to aggressive risk profile, you've got to allocate their assets to a moderate aggressive to aggressive asset allocation. And you can't do that unless you have access to variable products, and you can't do that unless you're licensed for security. So
right.
I think your point is a good one, Timothy.
Even if it's not a risk profile, there's a lost opportunity cost. It says, hey, maybe I'm not licensed to put it in these investment portfolios, but here's where in that other example, your $15,000 premium should go where it could have gone other places. So even beyond worrying about the client's risk tolerance, the limitation on what you can access people and giving them recommendations on what to do with their cash flow seems just not right.
What does the UPIA have to say about life insurance?
So the Uniform Prudent Investor Act governs all private trusts, including life insurance trusts. And so the Uniform Prudent Investor Act says the same thing for life insurance as it says for everything else. Justify costs. So being a fiduciary under the Uniform Prudent Investor Act, whether it's for an investment trust or a life insurance trust, means justifying costs relative to benefits, evaluating the reasonableness of performance expectations and assessing risk relative to grantor or trust risk tolerance.
So can I add one more thing? Within the Uniform Prudent Investor Act, there's a duty to diversify unless it is prohibitively expensive to do so. And one of the things we see in the ultra high net worth marketplace is there are times where someone buys $50 million of Mass Mutual or $75 million of New York Life or $100 million of Northwest Mutual. They're rare, but you'd never buy $100 million of one bond from one issuer. You diversify. And we recommend the same thing, right? That Northwest should not be on the risk for $100 million. The person should own, 4, 5, 6 policies from different insurers with low costs and different types of policies, just so they are diversified.
What does the Society of Actuaries have to say about this?
That was my reference earlier to, I think it was Timothy who was asking questions about you can't use illustrations to predict anything. And that's what the Society of Actuaries said. You just can't use the hypothetical value calculations as any valid data for decision support for product recommendations. U.S. Treasury in their so putting that together with the Uniform Prudent Investor Act, the OCC, the USCC under the U.S. Treasury oversees national banks. National banks that have trust departments are fiduciaries that have to follow the law, the Uniform Prudent Investor Act law as adopted by each state. And so the OCC has inspectors go in and look at these things. And they published a book, the Handbook for Unique and Hard to Value Assets, with a chapter about life insurance. And they say the same thing, that these illustrations, Timothy, they said exactly what you said. These illustrations, at least the hypothetical premium, the hypothetical cash value, the hypothetical definite, are unreliable and useless for decision support on, making product hold or buy product decisions. You got to look at costs, just like the Uniform Prudent Investor Act says. You got to look at costs. You got to look at the reasonableness of the rate of return. You got to look at the risk of underperformance relative to risk tolerance.
There's so many comments, but I don't want to monopolize everything.
Right. Okay. Does anybody else have any comments or questions? We're going to have 5 minutes left in this webinar. There's going to be a replay of this webinar. I'm going to send it out probably tomorrow in the follow-up email.
I've got a question for the cost of Veralytic. So I'm in a scenario, permanent insurance is applicable for 20% of the client's cash flow for whatever valid reason. I run an illustration and I send it over from curiosity just to see all those costs and can really evaluate, bring that to my decision tree. What's the cost structure and relationship like with somebody like me to Veralytic?
So if you work with, and I don't know your business model, Timothy, so I'm going to answer the question completely to cover everybody's business model. So if you're a fee-only advisor and you are not licensed to place insurance, then you can get Veralytic reports for free from people like Steve, who are in the business of prudent selection and retention and proper management of life insurance over time, according to fiduciary principles. If you are licensed to do the placement, then the subscription fee is $199 a month, unlimited use.
Thank you.
And just so you know, I've been a subscriber for 15 years. It's absolutely phenomenal, right? I've never had a client protest. I've only had the insurance agent on the other side of the equation who they quickly lose because this is empirical evidence and they're speaking from the sales manual, right?
I was going to ask, is the goal there of which insurance illustration that would be better suited, or is the goal to justify is the sale of life insurance best suited by putting the facts of the costs on the table? It sounds like it's the latter. And obviously, you know, we look at these plans, right? There's a lot of guessing, and depending upon conservative illustrations, like I like the one that shows no growth outside of the guaranteed rates. So let's just hypothetically say 20 years ago, I put in a whole life insurance for a very good reason. Now we're 20 years later, and I look at the what went in, how long they funded it. Maybe they funded it 10 of the 20 years. And then what's the cash value today of what they can actively draw off of that without recreating a new premium due. To me, that's the only real way to measure the rate of return or cost, because if you've got cash in that thing and you know you can spend X amount and still leave the death benefit to whatever business, estate, or personal reason, to me, it's the only way to really evaluate, was it worthwhile, and did it perform the way we did? I know that's a ridiculous question, but maybe more.
No, I mean, so Veralytic looks prospectively on are costs going forward competitive? Is the performance requirements going forward competitive? Is the historic, well, I guess it looks at historical performance as well. But it looks at historical performance for the for all the assets underlying cash value. So for the general account of the universal life, or the whole life policy, or the index universal life policy, or the family of funds on the variable policy. But to calculate a rate of return specific to a particular policyholder, I think what you just said is very reasonable.
Could somebody like me shoot an illustration just to kind of see what the report's like and what it would do?
Actually, you can download a sample right from our homepage, or actually,
Okay.
I'll send you the. I'll put that in the chat box right now.
I have the illness if I have to know everything about everything.
Yeah, while he's doing that, so this is what they look like in case everybody can't access the link. This is a sample report, and it compares the costs that we've been speaking about with the benchmark for all other, either general account or variable products. Same thing for premiums versus institutional and retail products, and then the same thing for cash value. So this was a pretty interesting case because every other agent was trying to replace this policy, right, with one of those manipulated policies that we showed you earlier. But then the research said the costs are low, the ratings are great, the premiums are low, the cash value is high. This is a phenomenal policy, right? I know we don't have a lot of time. This is just to show you how easy this is. Compliments of Mr. Flagg. This is the client's next policy. So 30 seconds later, he's going, wait a minute. Why am I paying 32 cents per dollar of death benefit on a present value basis to New York Life when MetLife only charges me 17 cents? I'm the same insured. Well, you can tell by the graphs, you're probably, even though you don't understand them yet, well, here you're doing better than everyone else. You're beating the benchmark. And here you're doing worse than the benchmark, right?
So actually, he's not the same insured, right? He's the same insured, but 10 years older.
No, it's the same insured, same age.
I see. It's not a replacement of when it was originally.
Right, this was just reviewing his two existing.
I see.
Right. So he immediately says, well, Steve, can I get rid of this New York Life policy and pay 16 cents per dollar of death benefit to someone else, right? And he ends up saving hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I see now.
So back to Sarah's question about who does what. We design, maintain that system that people like Steve use, and then Steve uses in the way you just described. So he's same idea. Morningstar is in the business of compiling,
right,
analyze, having algorithms and help publishing data. And then the financial advisor is the one in front of the client using that data to provide the client with better advice, fiduciary advice.
Right. Yeah, thank you guys. I feel like I have to jump, but I feel like every new iteration of permanent insurance is never good. Bobby Samuelson did a nice presentation one time that I saw that broke down the details, kind of like what you guys are doing of each type of policy, and broke it down by time period and the rage over universal life, the fall of universal life, the rage of IUL, and the beginning of the fall of IUL. And it seems like all these new permanent products just go by the wayside because they're all dependent upon some piece of data, whether it's interest rates or returns that explode at any given time. And,
So where I disagree with Bobby is there are 10,000 different pricing combinations and permutations for every single product. There's a different price for every age. There's a different price ×2 for gender. There's a different price for health risk classifications, which there can be up to 5. There's a different price for smoker, non-smoker, and in some cases, never smoker. There's a different price for different face amounts. There's a different price for different funding strategies. So there are 10,000 different prices. I completely agree with Bobby on the big picture. But where I disagree with Bobby is when you walk away from Bobby's remarks, sometimes people leave with the impression that, this product was good or not good, and now it's not good. I mean, it has nothing to do with the life cycle of a product. I know that the industry comes up with these new products in new ways and they market them and it's the best thing since sliced bread. But it is a function of financial strength, costs for that customer, the reliability of those cost representations, the accessibility or not to cash value, if that's important, and the actual historical performance of invested assets underlying cash values. Those are the 5 things that fiduciaries need to know every single time. And there is not one insurance company or one product type that is good at it all the time. And there's not one insurance company or product type that's bad at it all the time.
Right. Well, I got to jump. Thank you so much, Sarah, for putting this together. And I always appreciate your commentary, your newsletter, everything. I'm always impressed by that. So thank you. And I'm looking forward to the next one.
Thanks for all your questions.
Thank you guys for a good discussion.
Made it really interactive, Tim. Thanks. Timothy, thank you.
Have a great day. Bye.
Y'all, I'm going to end the webinar now, but just wanted to thank the speakers, and in the follow-up, y'all should connect with Steven and with Barry over LinkedIn. Barry is not in our LinkedIn group yet, but I think Steven is. So you got to get on there, and
sorry,
that's okay. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just that we have to use resources to increase transparency, and Americans really need this. This is our duty and obligation as professionals in this space, and it's much needed. We will be the rarity, the rare few, but it can be so powerful to be speaking the word of transparency, y'all. So thank you so much to the speakers, and thank y'all for being here. And I really want to collaborate more and work together to just speak the word of transparency into our country. So thank you all.
Thank you, Sarah. This was fun.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. See you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Okay, you bet. Bye.